Number 1. About 3 years ago, I started working a new job in a building that has a large service shop and office located basically in the middle of nowhere. Ever since I started this job, there have been some strange things going on in this building. Most of them, myself and other employees, have been able to find logical explanations for them, such as noises and hearing footsteps and voices. It's basically a barn type of building, and we do tend to get a lot of wind out here, so that could explain the noise we're hearing. As for the voices, we thought somebody was on the other side of the building, and that's what we were hearing. The voices carried throughout the building. It's a pretty open building, so I always thought that's what it was. But recently, there have been a few things that stood out to me. It seems like the activity is getting more and more extreme. For example, a couple of weeks ago, myself and one of the people that works in the store were just talking about random things. Out of nowhere, all the lights in the store turned off. Now, we were the only people in the store at the time, and we know that nobody turned the lights off, because from where we were standing, the light switch was only about 10 feet away from us. Obviously, we would have seen somebody walking. But the really strange part is when we walked over to the switch, it had physically been turned off. None of the other lights in the building were off, so we knew it wasn't a power outage or anything like that. And just a couple of days ago, I sat in my office working on the computer and had an empty soda bottle right next to me. I'm just there typing away when all of a sudden the soda bottle gets knocked over. I know for sure I didn't touch it because both my hands were on the keyboard at the time. Also, I knew it wasn't my leg. I tried bumping the desk, but considering the desk is so heavy, it takes a lot of force to move things. I was told at one point that this building has a lot of stories to it, and a lot of history. I've been told that over the years, there's been a lot of accidents here. For example, something happened on the highway right next to our building. So far, everything has been harmless, but either way, just imagine being out here in the middle of the nighttime. You're out here trying to get work done, and all of a sudden, this stuff starts happening. Yeah, you're not exactly going to feel too good. Number 2. The ecstatic feeling I had when we first purchased our new home is now more of a dream than a memory. We bought the 3-bedroom home on March 1st, 2012. After 8 years of my family living in the old home, my mother and I finally managed to talk enough sense into my grandfather, and we finally moved. I was 13 when my grandparents and mother and her 4 pets moved into our new home. Because everyone else had claimed the upstairs rooms, I took the basement without complaint. I had packed up 2 months before anyone else had started. Because of this, I was allowed to move into the house on my own for the time being. My mother felt it was alright, especially considering since our old house was only a mile and a half away. While living there, I slept on the floor for the first week, due to having no bed. Here was the unexplained thing. I would constantly hear what sounded like somebody walking around, and then the occasional cough. All this occurred in the master bedroom. Obviously, I quickly wrote it off as my imagination, and put the noises out of my mind. I decided to close all the doors in the house until my family moved in. I was hoping that that would make the noise better. It seemed to stop the coughing sounds, but I could still hear the footsteps. When my new bed arrived and my grandfather put it together, I started sleeping in my room in the basement. After hearing noises on the stairs leading down to my room several nights in a row, I took to closing the door that separated my small bedroom from the rest of the basement. About 2 weeks after I had moved in, my mother allowed my girlfriend and his sister, who was a close friend of mine, to stay 2 nights in a row with me. When they arrived, we decided to play hide and seek. Her sister and I hid in the closet under my stairs, and meanwhile she searched for us. She eventually gave up. She told us she had heard tapping in the hallway up the stairs. I had not told them about the strange noises in the house, trying to see if they heard the same things I did. I decided not to tell them. That's until the next day. I wanted to see what would happen. Eventually, though, it's 1 in the morning, and my girlfriend wakes me up. She tells me she heard footsteps on the stairs, and when she went to go check, nobody was there. I played it off as nothing and I went back to sleep. Eventually, even more time went by. It was now 5 in the morning. This time, her sister woke us up. She told us she could hear coughing from the bedroom across the hall from her. Well, we decided to stay awake and find something to entertain us. We spent the whole day out of the house, and we arrived home at around 7 p.m. for dinner. My girlfriend made us all some grilled cheese sandwiches, and we ate while we watched the television. After some time, I went to bed at around 12 p.m. They stayed awake to watch one more show. Finally, when my girlfriend went to bed, she told me they heard a door slam from upstairs. Finally, I decided to tell them I had been hearing noises too. After we talked for an hour or so, we both went to sleep. Almost a month and a half later, after I'd moved in, my mother and my aunt were packed up and started living in the house too. My aunt complained, as she still often does. She told me she was hearing noises in her room. When we first bought the house, we had to replace the door because it looked like somebody had kicked it in. My grandparents moved in 2 months after they did, but being the people that they are, of course, they never believed us. They denied everything that happened and just explained it as coincidence. Sometimes I'll hear my mother call me from upstairs, and even though I know she isn't home, I'll go check it out. Of course, I find nobody. My mother and aunt have also noticed this. In fact, my grandmother admits to actually hearing my aunt once, even though nobody was home. One time, both my mother and I heard typing from the office. We thought it was each other. When we figured out that it was neither of us, needless to say, we were a bit nervous. The lights will sometimes turn on and off at night, as well as the television. Sometimes when I'm in my room, I hear what sounds like scratching. There have been times when the light is on in the hallway, and my mother has her door open. Sometimes, she'll see what looks like somebody running across the hallway. Just a few nights ago, both my aunt and my mother heard voices clear as day. They were coming from the living room in the early morning hours. None of us recognized who it was. I constantly felt like I was being watched, especially at night. At this point in my life, I finally had enough, and so did the rest of my family. But at the end of everything, I don't know what to do. I don't know what's going on. I guess more than anything, I'd like some advice, or maybe even some ideas to what's going on. I could really use some answers. Number 3. About 5 years ago, my family and I moved into a 179-year-old Victorian house. When we got there, the house was a huge mess. Nobody had lived there for 10 years. The previous owners were librarians, and since they had so many animals, every single door in the house has scratch marks, all the way up to the top of the door frames. But we needed the house nonetheless. We needed 64 acres of land to hold all our horses. About a year after moving in, we started noticing a few things that weren't exactly normal. We all thought we were being watched almost all the time, and we almost never went into the attic because of all the flies. Eventually, we hire a maid. On her first day, she was cleaning my stepdad's office. That's when she stopped to tell my mom that she felt a powerful energy in that area. She told my mom, but she didn't really think that much about it. But at this
Let me just start off by saying the reason I stayed employed so long even after the first weird thing that happened was because the job paid well over minimum wage and it was about a 10-minute drive from my house. So, before anyone asks, That's why I didn't up and quit. I worked at a large hotel in a medium-sized city in the Midwest. Where isn't important. I got the job right out of high school, and it was perfect for me. Good pay, close to home, easy as hell. And I did my research on the hotel. It wasn't built on any ancient burial grounds, and from what I could tell, no one had ever died there. I didn't experience anything remotely weird until the third floor renovations started. I had kind of a jack of all trades position at the hotel, meaning I did a lot of different things. I cleaned rooms, worked the front desk, delivered room service orders, sometimes even did lifeguard duty at the pool. Once the shit started happening, it happened all over, and me being in the position I was, I saw more than any other employee did. Believe what you want, but the events I am about to recount were all too real for me. I wish I were just being creative. I got to my night shift at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. Being that it was in the middle of the week, we had about half of our regular occupancy. By no means an empty hotel, but just generally less hustle was needed than, say, a Friday or Saturday night. The first few hours of my shift went as they normally did. I checked for any incoming reservations due to arrive that night, of which there were two. The kitchen closed at 10, so I only had to run up one room service order, which I ended up getting a $10 tip from, so that was nice. I was getting ready to settle in at the front desk when the phone rang. I looked and noticed it was from a room. Our new phone system had a digital display showing us what room was calling us, and this call said it was coming from room 323. Immediately I was suspicious, as remodeling had started on the third floor about 2 weeks prior. I answered the phone. "Front desk, this is Nick. How may I help you?" There was a cough on the other end. I repeated myself. Oh, sorry. How are you?" replied a young woman's voice. "I'm doing fine. And yourself?" "Well, not too good, actually," she said with a hint of worry in her voice. "I'm sorry to hear that. Is there anything in particular I can help you with?" "I'm not sure. Maybe." My regular script I had followed had made me forget where the call came from. I finally inquired. "Can I ask where you're calling from, ma'am?" "I'm in room 323, and you're right. I need help." I had never suggested she needed help, but okay. "Ma'am, room 323 is currently unavailable due to the third floor renovation. Are you sure that's where you are? What's your name?" "I need help, Nick. Right now. I don't think I was supposed to come up here," she said with a sense of dread I could feel through the phone. Now I got it. She had wandered up to the third floor and somehow gotten lost. How could she do that is beyond me. There's signs everywhere. She went into room 323 and used the phone to call. "Okay, what's wrong?" "And what's your name, miss?" I asked. "I can't get out. The door won't open." Confused and slightly irritated by her not answering my question, I cut to the chase. "Your name, miss?" She hesitated. "Marion Kennedy," she sputtered out. "One moment, please," I said, already halfway through my check into the current occupants list in the computer system. "No Marion Kennedy." "Okay, Miss Kennedy, I'm not finding you here. Are you here with someone else who your room may be under? And what room were you initially in?" "I need help. Please come to room 323 and help me. Please," she said, noticeably more calm than before, almost as if she was annoyed to still be on the phone with me. "Miss Kent," is all I managed to get out before the line clicked and I realized I'd been hung up on. I set a "Be back in 5" sign on the front counter and made my way up to the third floor. I reached the hallway that room 323 sat in, and as soon as I crossed the threshold into it, I was overcome with a feeling of panic. The hairs stood up on my neck, as they say. Now apprehensive to move forward, I looked around me. There was equipment and materials strewn about, and a large sheet of plastic covering most of the wall and doors on the left-hand side. I could hear the faint sound of music coming from down the hall. Room 323 would be somewhere in the middle. I slowly made my way down the hall, illuminated by only 2 light bulbs at each end, darkness meeting at the center of the hallway. As I got closer, The music got louder. It was 1920s style music, like it was being played on a phonograph. As I got closer to the darkness, I noticed a dark red light emanating from under one of the doors. I'm sure you can guess which one. I stood in front of room 323, essentially shaking due to the sense of uneasiness I had. I listened closely, trying to hear over the music for anything else. Miss Kennedy? I choked out from my dry throat. No response. Just as I was about to turn around and get away, I heard a voice from the other side. "Come on in," said a cheery male voice. The calmness in his voice proved soothing, and I became ever so slightly more comfortable with the situation. "Miss Kennedy called down to the front desk saying she needed help with something? She's in the bathroom right now. Why don't you come on in here and we'll get to the bottom of it," the man said. I hesitated. "Come on in, boy. We don't bite," he said, and let out a small chuckle. He kept on chuckling as I used my master key to unlock the electric lock. I turned the knob slowly, still scared half to death. As I inched the door open, his chuckle turned into a full-blown maniacal laugh as the red light from the room began to flood into the darkness. Suddenly, the laughing and the music stopped as if it had all been one noise abruptly cut off. I will never forget the small moment of silence I stood in. It enveloped me in fear. I stood there motionless until I heard a faint whisper from not one, but two voices. "Just a little bit further." That was it. I sprinted full speed down the hallway back the way I came, ran down the stairs, and back to the front desk. I immediately called the police. They got there and went up to check room 323 and found nothing but the renovation equipment related to the work being done in that room at that time. No music player, no people, and nothing that could have given off a red glow. On top of that, there was no evidence that anyone had been in there, workers included, in quite a while, as evidenced by a buildup of dust. And if that weren't enough, there was no phone in the room. They said to call back if I had any more trouble, and I apologized for wasting their time. They were cool cops though, told me their job was my safety, and reiterated to call them back if anything else weird went on. I walked them out the front doors of the hotel and walked back to the front desk. On it was a return envelope for room keys people give back at checkout, marked 323. On the back of the envelope was a short survey. They marked 1 for poor for each line and included a short note on the provided lines below. Maybe next time. I never dealt with anything quite like that again, but I do have some other really scary shit to tell you about the hotel I worked at. Maybe I'll even tell you why I eventually quit.
Hey, shut up.
This one probably left me the most unnerved of anything that happened. It happened some months after the first story I posted, with a few minor incidences in the interim. It was a Saturday night. I remember this distinctly because of the amount of incoming and outgoing guests we see on this particular night of the week is directly related to what happened. Me and another employee were working the front desk, taking the incoming reservations. There were people around the lobby chatting, either coming back from or on their way out to the next bar. It was about 1 a.m., so people realized they had an hour to do their livers as much damage as possible until they returned to the hotel for the night. I don't blame them for going elsewhere to drink, since our bar was woefully overpriced. Even so, our bar was at about 75% capacity. Anyways, I got done with my guest at the desk and noticed there was no longer anyone waiting, as my coworker had just started taking care of another guest. I walked to the room behind the front desk to get something to drink and to check my phone out of the line of sight of guests lingering in the lobby. We play music which is broadcast through speakers throughout the hotel, including the room I was in. It comes from a playlist on a computer whose only purpose is to fill the hallways and lobby with elevated music. Being that it came from the computer, I was slightly taken back when static came through the speakers. I listened for a moment as a hint of white noise hissed through the speakers, then completely cut off. I checked the computer, which was working just fine, and showed the current song is playing as it should be. So I checked the cord which led to the receiver. All was fine there as well. I decided the problem was out of my control and ventured to return to the front desk. But as I opened the door, a sudden wave of deafening silence flooded over me. It actually startled me. I opened the door all the way and stopped dead in my tracks. I had been in the room for no longer than 20 seconds, and apparently, in that time, each and every of the probably 20 plus people in the lobby, including my coworker, had vanished. I felt a drip of cold sweat run down my back. I gazed across the lobby to the bar, only to find it deserted as well. All I could hear during this time was the sound of my own heart beating. There had to be some kind of rational explanation for this. I ventured out into the lobby, each step echoing through the high ceilings. I knocked on a random room door. Got no response. Another. No response. Just for shits and giggles, I checked the second floor as well. I heard a door creak at the end of the hallway. I assumed it was open as I didn't hear it close, so I trudged down to the end of the hall, and as I got there, the door to room 202 clicked shut. I politely knocked on the door and got no response. I pounded on the door harder and yelled, "Hello?" Finally, I used my master key to unlock the door and burst in. In hindsight, probably not the smartest idea, considering I had no idea what awaited me on the other side. I was met by nothing. The same ear-shattering silence as before continued to plague me. I checked the main room and the bathroom and found no one. I exited the room, struggling to make sense of what was going on around me. Then, that horrible silence was broken by the familiar ding of the elevators. I looked up, and to my right at the numbers above the door, which told me that this particular elevator trip had originated on the floor above me. It was coming down, and once I noticed it go past the second floor, I rushed downstairs to try to meet whoever it was, to see if they had any idea of what the hell was going on. I made it to the first floor and waited a cautious distance from the elevator. For what felt like an eternity, I nervously tapped my foot on the ground. Then, the elevator door opened. There was nothing. No one was inside the elevator. This thoroughly scared the bejesus out of me, and I ran to the room behind the front desk. I gathered my belongings as quickly as I could and prepared to leave the hotel. I felt disoriented from the sheer silence that filled the walls I so desperately did not want to be trapped in. As soon as I turned the door handle to exit the room, a cascade of noise hit me like a ton of bricks. The music, the chatter of patrons in the lobby, my coworker's voice informing the guests he was helping about our breakfast hours. Everything was back to normal. It was as if what had just happened hadn't happened at all. I stood there, frozen, until my coworker turned to me. "You okay?" he said. I couldn't bring myself to speak. "Are you leaving or something?" he inquired, noticing my coat on my arm. His tone told me he was on the brink of annoyance, pending my answer to his question. I snapped out of it. "Oh, no. I offered no real explanation before I turned around and went back into the room. I set my coat down, took a deep
Oh, wait.
and walked back out. I noticed a new guest had just entered the queue behind the ones my
Hello.
coworker was currently
Sorry.
assisting. I pressed my shirt down and stepped up to the computer. "Welcome. I'm Nick. What can I do for you?" At this point in my tenure at the Whitmore Hotel, I was very
can fly.
cautious. Nothing directly dangerous had happened to me yet, so I had no reason to believe I was in any danger. I have always been a believer in the paranormal, so the fact that there were strange things happening didn't necessarily cause a deep-rooted worry in me. so much as it caused some definite standalone frights. I had avoided the third floor of the hotel as much as I possibly could, since the event I wrote about is one of the few other smaller
Bobbleheads? Sure, if I
instances
have
that
the money,
occurred.
I'll sell
If assistance
bobbleheads.
was needed on the third floor, I generally handed off the responsibility to one of my coworkers without explaining why. No one else had ever had any bad experiences up there, so they didn't question it too much, aside from assuming I was being lazy. But sure enough, something happened early on the night shift, and I got a call from the third floor. It was a Wednesday night, about 2 a.m. I was sitting back, relaxing behind the front desk, when a call came in. Room 325. I answered the phone while simultaneously checking the computer to make sure someone was in fact staying in that particular room that night. All checked out. The man asked for more towels to be left outside his door. I set the voicemail message stating I would be back in 10 minutes or less, and set out a sign saying the same. I went to the storage area and grabbed a handful of towels. I made my way up to the third floor and knew exactly where room 325 was, considering its close proximity to the room that had been ever present in nightmares past. I apprehensively strolled down the hall, which, although now properly lit, still gave me a feeling of uneasiness. Nonetheless, I set the towels on the floor, knocked twice on the door, and made my way back down the hall. I turned around for whatever reason, and the towels were gone. No door opening and closing. Nothing. I chalked it up to me just not hearing it, and went about my night. About 5 minutes after I got back to the desk, I got another call. This time, it was the dreaded room 323. I let it ring through because I knew for a fact that no one was in that room tonight. The phone never went to voicemail. It must have rang 30 times before a sickening mix of anxiety and curiosity got the best of me, and I answered the phone. I didn't say anything. "Hello?" said the voice on the other side. Since it sounded like a normal voice, and nothing otherworldly as I had convinced myself it would, I entertained the notion that this might be something rationally explainable. Hi, this is Nick at the front desk. How may I was cut off. I asked for more towels. Yes, sir. I dropped more towels outside the room 325 just a few minutes ago, I replied. The line clicked, indicating I'd just been hung up on. This call more so confused and frightened me. So many questions were raised. Did the previous call really come from 323, and I just absent-mindedly didn't notice? Who grabbed the towels from 325? He implied he'd gotten a few from in front of 325, but I know in the time I left them there and looked back, he couldn't have gotten them from 323 and back in time without me at least hearing the one step it would take to get there, much less the door opening and closing. I checked the computer log for room 323, and it showed the room was empty. I was once again on high alert. I resolved to leave the towels outside room 325 again, so I didn't have to stand in front of 323 for even a split second. I would deal with the potentially angry guest again, if need be. I made my way to the third floor, and as I walked down, nothing was amiss. I set the abundance of towels down in front of room 325, and the moment they touched the carpet, the lights went out. Not all of them, mind you, just every light between the light at either end of the hall. I was frozen in panic. A million situations raced through my mind before I snapped out of it. As I turned to run, every light in the hallway swelled to an impossible brightness, in a blinding flash that left me disoriented. All I really recall is that I ran backwards down the hall, weary of whatever might exit room 323 to devour me, or whatever would happen. One thing stuck out in my mind though, and that was that the towels were already gone. I sprinted back to the front desk, where luckily there was a walk-in guest who made casual conversation and took my mind off of things, if only for a few minutes. Once they were on their way to their room, I snapped right back to it. I don't know at what point it happened, but something clicked in my mind. I hastily ran my fingers along the clacking keyboard and checked the room log for 325. It was being
Where's
occupied
pasta?
by a Mario Kennedy.
You're
The
listening
name
to
stuck
it.
out like a
Creepy
sore
pasta.
thumb. Before I could
Yay!
figure out what to do with the information, the phone rang. Luckily, it
Now
was
keep
from
it
room
down.
225, so I wouldn't have to make my way back to that damned third-floor hallway. Unfortunately, they were complaining about a strange noise coming from above them. I told them I would call the room and ask them to keep it down. I figured I can't be harmed through a phone call, right? I dialed room 325 and was met with an answer before the first ring even began. It was a woman. Hello? Yes, hi. This is the front desk. The guests in the room below you just called to complain about a strange noise coming from above them, which would be your room. This is just a courtesy call to please ask you to resolve whatever is causing the excess noise. Oh, of course, replied the oddly chipper young woman, whose voice I know I'd heard before. Thank you, and the line clicked. These people really didn't like saying goodbye. The next hour or so went by without incident. I got up to go to the bathroom, and when I came back, there were 2 guest checkout envelopes. One from room 323, the other room 325. Neither had any comments written down, but every critique had been marked for 4, which was satisfactory. I wrestled with the idea of going up to see if it looked as if no one had been in the rooms for what felt like an eternity before something inside me said it was safe. I ventured my way up, making sure all the lights were on first. I got to room 325, still unsure if I had the guts to go into 323. What I was hoping for did not come true. The moment I opened the door, red emanated from the room, but not like it did from 323. This was blood. I only opened the door a few inches, and all I could see was red all over everything. That was enough for me. I sprinted back to the desk and immediately called the police. They arrived and went up to room 325. They checked it, and surprise, surprise, they found nothing. Then they checked 323 and found the vast number of towels in the bathtub, soaking wet. Finally, some evidence that someone had been in there. They checked the camera footage, but it never showed me taking up the towels in the first place. I once again apologized, which was met with positive reactions from the once again understanding police. I sat back down at the computer, where I had just tried to show the police the Mario Kennedy reservation, which of course wasn't there. I moved the mouse from the screensaver, and there it was, a picture of room 325, covered in blood. In the corner of the room stood a young man and woman, covered head to toe in blood. All I could discern from the flood of red round them was their impossibly bright eyes and teeth. They had hideous grins on their faces. I quickly closed the horrifying picture. I looked up from the desk to find the 2 of them standing there, covered in blood, grinning and breathing
I
heavily.
asked for true stories,
I
not this
blacked out.
fake
Next
shit.
thing I know, I was being cared for by EMTs. I asked what happened, and one of the police officers said, as he was walking back in to get my signature on the statement I had just made, that I stood frozen at the desk for about 10 seconds and then fainted. I have no recollection of that whatsoever. This was the first instance that truly rattled me to my core. I was hesitant to keep working there, so I compromised. I took a week vacation, during which time not one strange thing happened to me. I figured I was getting stressed from working so many night shifts, with some day shifts thrown in there, as if to make for certain I wouldn't get a proper amount of sleep. I did, however, spend this week digging much deeper into the Whitmore Hotel than I did at the beginning of my employment. I will share what I found in the next update.
Alright, I don't like this guy.
His shoes are gone, but his feet aren't damaged.
When I was 19, I worked for a company that allocated labor to rural areas of Australia. Basically, what you did was tell them when you were available, and they'd send you to a remote farm for a few weeks where you would do whatever they needed done. It was hard work and long hours, but good pay and good fun if you got in with a nice group of workers. When this occurred, I was working on a large property. I was told it covered roughly the same landmass as the state of Maryland, USA, about 9 hours from Sydney City, and the property itself was about 40 minutes from the nearest town. In short, it was in the middle of nowhere. I was working at the farm clearing bushland with 3 other guys my age from the city. Our boss was a guy called Jeremy who owned the farm and supervised us while helping out with the work. He was pretty laid back and was generally really good to us. This summer in particular was very hot, and the work was hard. So one day when the temperature hit about 38 degrees Celsius, or 100 degrees Fahrenheit, Jeremy decided to give us the afternoon off. He said he knew of a water hole on the farm about a 25-minute drive north. I was keen for a swim, but the other guys just wanted to relax for the afternoon. So him and I hopped in one of the work trucks and started heading across the property. It was mostly wide, empty expanses with a few clumps of scattered bushland. Jeremy wasn't much of a talker, so we drove more or less in silence. After about 20 minutes, however, he suddenly perked up and jabbed me in the ribs. "You see that over there, beneath the 2 dead trees?" I should mention here that if you're not familiar with inland areas, particularly those in Australia, they are brown or red and mostly flat and bland, meaning any bright colors stick out like a sore thumb. So you can imagine our surprise when we could see a large blue angular structure far off in the distance. We steered in its direction, and as we got closer we realized it was a huge blue shipping container just sitting in the middle of nowhere. Jeremy was perplexed, and
I've
I asked
heard
him
this
if he
one.
knew what it was, but he obviously didn't. He said he hadn't seen it when he drove through the same area about 5 weeks before, and he wanted to go and see what it was. Initially, we pulled to a stop about 100 meters away from it. At this stage, I had a really bad feeling. The whole thing wasn't right. It's hard to explain, but if you can imagine seeing such a foreign object in the middle of a huge barren expanse, it had to be something weird. Jeremy, however, wanted to investigate, which I understood, given it was his property, but in truth, I was really anxious. As we got closer, things got even more bizarre. There was a big diesel generator behind it thumping away, and a CCTV camera on each side, all motion activated, so they buzzed from side to side, following us as we moved
When I
around.
catch this
I
fly,
tried to reason with Jeremy, something along the lines of, "With all this security, someone obviously doesn't want us here. Let's just go." He brushed me off, however, reminded me it was his farm, and whoever had put this here was trespassing, so he wanted to go inside. Despite all the surveillance, there was only a small padlock on the huge door. He had bolt cutters in his toolbox, and after a bit of a struggle, we broke the lock and went inside.
God.
The first thing I noticed was the rush
I
of
got
cold
scared
air
in
as we
real
got in.
life.
The
Bring
place
in
was
chat.
air-conditioned, which I
Stop
must
scaring
admit
me.
was quite pleasant on such a hot day. We searched around for a light switch, but I could already see this was some sort of IT setup. There were flashing LEDs all around the place, and the sort of hum you hear when a hard drive is working hard. When we finally switched on the lights, we could see a sophisticated, albeit somewhat cluttered, office setup. There were hard drives the size of bar fridges and other computer equipment lining the walls, sometimes piled 2 or 3 high, and plastic storage boxes scattered around the far wall, and several desks with computer monitors arranged in the middle, complete with rolling office chairs. At this stage, I felt like I was in one of those nonsensical dreams. This made absolutely no sense. We wandered to the middle and sat down at the desk to see if the computers could give us any idea of what was going on here. My heart was racing, and I just wanted to bolt. We had been seen by CCTV, so if anyone was monitoring, they already knew we were here. Jeremy, on the other hand, was adamant we had to get to the bottom of this, so I put on a brave face and started looking through the computer. This went on for a while, but in short, neither of us had a very high grasp of technology outside of Facebook and Microsoft Word. And the best I can describe it from my lay position is that it was endless lists of computer talk. It was like how the old Napster or LimeWire download screens looked
I'm
like,
actually getting
just
nervous.
constantly picking up and receiving data, then recording it on
No,
several
no.
windows. I gave up on the computers and walked cautiously
No, you
over to the
don't.
far end of the
You're not going
container to the
outside.
big pile of storage boxes. By then I was pretty sure no one else was there, as there was nowhere to hide really, but I was still incredibly on edge. I decided, against my better judgment, to see what was inside all these boxes. My brief sift through this box still makes me feel sick to my stomach. It didn't take me long to realize that this box was full of posters, DVDs, and photos, bunch of explicit and hardcore child X-rated material. One thing that still gets to me is that it was all neatly ordered into folders and small boxes. These people were organized. I immediately recoiled, jumped up and ran over to Jeremy. I could hardly string a sentence together. I said something to the effect of, "Mate, get out. Dude, child, what? Just get out of here, dude." I dragged him out, composed myself, and managed to explain what I saw. We jumped back into the truck and sped back to the house. The farm had no mobile phone reception. We hadn't bought the satellite phone, so we had to get back to the landline to call the police. Once we called them, they still had to make it all the way to the farm from the nearest police station, which was in a town about a half hour from the town closest to the farm. As I mentioned, very remote. We waited, talking frantically about what we'd seen, until the cops arrived almost an hour later. They arrived with 2 four-wheel drives, and we jumped in and led them back. This is where it gets worse. By the time we got back, the container door was open, and there was fire inside. We had only 2 small extinguishers in the cars, and they did very little. The fire department took an hour to get there, which, by that stage, most of the damage was already done. An arson report by the federal police found almost no evidence of the computer equipment described, and only traces of paper and cardboard. This means that whoever ran it knew we were there and had time to come and remove most of it and get away. There were various ways to get off the property, and the landmass was huge, and there was no real way to tail them. Since the police hadn't taken us all too seriously in the first instance, probably due to our poor explanation of phone, aerial surveillance was also impossible by that time we had pieced it all together. I took a keen interest in following it up, but with no real evidence of who might be responsible, the investigation went cold. I've kept in contact with Jeremy, and the shipping container is still there on the farm, as it's too expensive to move. I'll never forget what I saw in those boxes. September 2010. My boyfriend Dave, his best friend Tony, and my best friend Liz and I were all coming back to our hometown for our final year of college after spending the summer in London. We had a fantastic time, staying in my uncle's apartment, partying, and exploring such a big city. It was great. We stopped at a bed and breakfast that night about half of the way home, and were planning to get home at about 6 p.m. We all woke up early, about 4, maybe 5, ready to set off again, and we discovered that someone had obviously driven too close to our car and broke the right wing mirror off. Seeing as this was my dad's birthday present to me, and I had it barely 2 months, I was absolutely fuming. We asked the landlady where we could possibly find spares or something to use for the time being. She said she had driven past a makeshift scrapyard or something a while back. She wasn't sure if it was still there, but she drew us a rough map, and we got back on the road. I wasn't very sure if she was right about her directions, because the closer we got to the area she circled it in, the more desolate the surroundings were. The roads got more difficult and had gone from stone to dirt. Around us there weren't any farms anymore, just long, weedy grass and patches of forest. It had basically become a moor. We were about to head off because of the wild animals, and I just had to get over being a paranoid driver and deal without my wing mirror, when surely enough my boyfriend pointed out in front to a handwritten sign directing us 2 miles down the road to Cafe and Car Spares. We drove down into a little cove surrounded by forest and all got out, except for my friend Liz, who was asleep in the back seat. There was a tiny cream hut with cafe spray painted on the roof, a caravan, and a hill of metal and bits of cars. As to be expected, we were the only visitors parked up in front. The sun was up, but no lights or people were around. I guess they were still sleeping. It was still about 6 anyway. We all walked up to the scrap pile, and I had to fumble through it, looking for a wing mirror or any sort of mirror that could do for the time being, until I could get it repaired. Tony picked up what could only be at least a decade-old mirror and suggested we just take it and go. But me, being stupid and sincere, insisted I have to go give them some money for it. I can't just take it and go. I knocked on the door and waited. A big, hard-faced man answered the door, and at first looked angry and tired, then smiled at me a two-toothed smile. He leered at me for a few seconds, then, seeing the boys approach, asked us what we wanted. Tony handed him the mirror and asked how much for it. He said nothing, just to get to know us, to which I thought fair enough. 2 more men then left the patio door on the other side. They turned and smiled, both skinheads with teeth like meth addicts, and came over. They stank. He gave them the mirror and told them to go attach it to our car. He then introduced himself as Ian, sat us down on the patio chairs, and offered us some sandwiches. I politely declined, but he insisted we must be hungry, and told me to come in, that women are best at making sandwiches. I declined again, finding him a little bit sexist at this point, and when he asked again, Dave, more sternly, reinforced that I said I don't want to come in. Ian muttered something and then came and sat on the chairs with us. It became awkward very quickly as he started asking questions. It started off innocently, like asking us how old we were, where we were from, and then became a little more uncomfortable. He asked if I had a boyfriend, to which Dave answered, and then started asking us both what we liked to do to each other. Private stuff like that, to which we didn't answer. We sat in silence, until we heard Liz scream. When we turned around, I saw one of the men meant to be fixing the mirror with his hand in the back window grasping Liz's leg. The other was looking around nervously behind the car. We got up immediately and sprinted off the patio, Tony running after the guys, but they both headed into the forest. Liz was hysterical. She'd woken up to find herself on her own in the car, and a man's hand running up her leg. I can't even imagine how terrifying that must have felt. I got into the back seat with her and consoled her while Dave came around the other side to get in, and told us some nails were on the floor. We looked over, and there were about 12 of them arranged around the tire, like the guy was ready to pop them. I couldn't really think why at the time, but now I wonder where they got all those car parts. We decided it was enough. We didn't want to spend any more time there, mirror or no mirror, and were ready to go when Tony was the last to get in the car. We closed the backseat door, and as we looked back and saw Ian re-emerge from the house with something long in his hands, running towards us, my vision adjusted when he got a bit closer, and then I realized he was holding a rifle, a hunting rifle. At that point, I actually burst into tears and hit the engine, slamming on the accelerator as hard as possible. The car started to go, and we got up to about 90, forgetting the dirt roads and just driving over whatever until that scrapyard was out of sight. We didn't stop looking behind us until we were safely on the motorway getting home. To this day, whenever I go to London, I take a train instead. I'm still terrified I'll meet them again. I live in a town of about 11,000 in rural Wisconsin. Not by reference, but for a job. We are moving when I get a better one. I was on my way to my employer's house. He runs the company out of his basement until we get a new office space. I was being tailgated bad by a ratty blue car and a white bald guy. I drive a Kia Soul, which has a flat back end, so if I can't see your headlights, that means you're a mere few inches off my butt, and you will get me tapping my brakes. This guy did. He honked at me. Whatever. I flipped him off and slowed down to 5 miles under the speed limit. There wasn't anyone behind me, so I wasn't ruining anyone else's day. He had chances to pass me on the country road, but didn't. After a few minutes with no other cars around and him still kissing my bumper at 50 miles per hour, I grabbed my cell phone and pretended to turn around quickly and take a picture of him. Then I pretended to call 911. I was in the country with no other cars around, and this guy was getting creepy. I came to my turn, but decided to see if this guy would follow me. I turned left, and he followed. Then I came to a roundabout and thought I would lose him. I traveled the entire thing around twice, and he still followed me. At this point, I knew he was messing with me, trying to scare me. Well, I decided to let myself be late for my meeting. I began to drive to the police station. He followed me the whole way there. I pulled up and parked, ready to run inside. I thought he would leave. Nope. He parked right next to me and just stared at me. And he pulled up on my side of the car, close enough that I would have a hard time opening the door all the way. He was in his 40s, I'm guessing, wearing sunglasses and a creepy smile. He was wearing fairly neat clothes, nothing scary there. The interior of the car was pristine. I was anticipating to see a gun. I should mention here that I'm trained to be a behavior analyst, and while I work with kids right now, my hobby is criminal behavior and profiling. I was seriously trying to read this guy. A few seconds went by and I grabbed my phone again, this time intent on calling 911 from the police station parking lot. As I dialed, he rolled his passenger window down, said nothing, rolled it back up, and took off. I went inside and told an officer what happened. Sadly, I was too focused on not crashing to get a plate number. Apparently, there had been a lot of complaints about tailgaters recently, multiple with a blue car. I filled out a report with the officer, and they gave me a card for victim services in a local woman's shelter, just in case he followed me home one night and I didn't feel safe. But I live in a secure building with my fiancée. I went out to my car, and there was a note on the windshield. All it had on it was a smiley face. Serious horror movie stuff there. I took it back inside. The officer said he'd call me a few times during the night, and I should avoid going anywhere alone for a while. He did call twice and said he was patrolling my parking lot during his night shift. This is a small town, and the attitude around here is very communal, so I feel safe that someone will back me up. If I ever see this guy again, no question, I will call 911 and lead him straight to the police station again. I also told my fiancée that I will post my work schedule, or even when I have to leave for another reason, and that if I don't text him within 10 minutes of my estimated arrival, to call 911. This happened like 16 years ago. I was 12 then. I was in the summer camp of my Boy Scout troop, but with both boys and girls. As are all in Spain, scouting here is actually a quite liberal thing. One of the most important activities during the summer camp is what we called the raid, basically going out of the camp to adventurously trek for a couple of days. My friends and I planned an amazing route through a beautiful mountain range called the Pyrenees in the northeast of Spain. 3 days walking, 2 nights sleeping out at the camp. My raid group consisted of 15 boys and girls, all between the ages of 12 and 14 years old. We took food with us, knew how to read a map, how to build shelter, how to search for water, and pretty much anything necessary to survive for a couple of days, so no adults were coming with us, and that doesn't happen anymore. Our plans for the first day were to climb a mountain that was just under 10,000 feet high and sleep by a glacial lake nearly on top of it. It was a long walk from our camp, about 15 miles and quite steep. So at about 1800, we decided we were going to not reach the lake at a prudent time. We found a nice place to build a shelter, did it, and then cooked some dinner. We were in the middle of a beautiful mountain, about 6 miles from the nearest road, and let's add another 5 kilometers more to the closest village. We couldn't have been happier. We still had nearly 2 hours until sunset when we finished our meal, so we thought it was a good idea to send a smaller group to clean dishes and refill water to a spring we had seen while walking. I volunteered to go, and 3 other friends joined. We got a couple of light torches too, just in case, and headed towards the fountain. Night came while we were on our way back to the shelter. We could hear the rest of the group singing and having fun in the distance. Suddenly one of my friends stopped and pointed at something just by the side of our trail. "This wasn't here on our way down. I'm sure of it," he said. There was a light reflecting pole from the road, torn into pieces. We went from being happy and relaxed to being mildly scared in just a second, and rushed all the way to where the rest of our friends were. We told them about our creepy finding right away. We were just kids, so fear escalated quite fast. Who could be hiding in the same mountain we were at, and why? Two of the older guys, they were 14 years old, thought it would be a good idea to go and take a look around to try to calm us down. Although being without them was even scarier, we also appreciated it. They went away with a light torch, a knife, and a whistle, so we could hear from further apart if they were in trouble. We remained seated inside the shelter, which was nothing more than a couple of tarps held by sticks near a big boulder, silent and scared. I remember hearing quite a lot of sobbing around me. I was thinking I didn't want to die there. One of the girls suggested that we could sing to try and think of something else. Some disapproved because we might not hear the whistles, but we did anyway, although not very loud. We were like that for about 10 to 20 minutes. The whistle interrupted our song. We heard it clearly. Two whistles coming towards us at a really fast pace. I remember taking my knife from its sheath and keeping it in my hands. Luckily, it was our friends. They arrived nervous and exhausted from the run. They said they stumbled upon a long standing stick with lots of blood all over it, more than what our nerves could stand. Most of us started crying. Some prayed too. They told us they were going back to look for whatever was in the mountains with us and confront him. In case things go bad, we'll run somewhere else so we can't find you, one said. We asked them to stay, but nobody was able to move a finger to actually stop them from leaving. There was no more singing, only weeping and barely audible prayers. I just didn't want to die there. I wanted to see my family. After a while, we heard some noises, followed by the voices of our friends. They came back at a calm pace, with relief in their faces. It was all just a misunderstanding, one explained. It's just a park ranger. We found him and he explained to us that he was just walking around as part of his duty, said the other, and the bloody stick was just from a rabbit he had hunted for dinner. It was quite a relief, and we relaxed. Someone even spoke about taking out our sleeping bags and going to sleep, and that sounded wonderful. But it wasn't long until one of the older guys said he was a bit suspicious. You see, he wasn't wearing a uniform, he said, nor a badge or anything that could identify him as a ranger, answered another. And who walks kilometers away from the closest road, late at night, to hunt rabbits? Are there even rabbits in this altitude? Terror came back in a second. They were right. That story didn't make any sense. Let's go back there and freaking threaten him, one of the older guys said. We asked them to stay with us again and got the same results. Once they were gone, someone said that maybe he had followed them and now knew exactly where we were. We all shivered in panic. Nobody was paying the slightest attention to anyone else anymore. Nobody cried and nobody prayed. I remember I only had one thought in my mind. I'd rather kill than get killed in this terrible place. We waited seated, silent, and ready to fight for our lives. We all had our knives out and ready. Minutes passed, and suddenly we heard people running and approaching. We heard screams of terror. From the sound, it was obvious there were more than two people coming at us. I hadn't been more scared in my life. I hoped I could say goodbye to my mom, my dad, and my sister. My knife was ready to stab whoever came close to me. We finally saw our two friends running for their lives, being followed by two men. They came just at the front of the opening of the shelter and stopped. The two men chasing them did the same, and we could see their faces. They were our camp leaders, who had been following us all the time, but hiding. And the four started laughing at us and asking if we were scared. It was just a joke, the entire time. Everyone started crying, and some even had trouble to grasp proper breaths due to anxiety for quite a while. We were all not amused. And only after a couple minutes, the fun four realized what they had done. They had taken 13 children to the point of holding a knife and being willing to kill with it. We obviously relaxed a lot, but our fears became anger. It had been a joke way out of proportion or the most basic of common sense. They spent quite a while saying how sorry they were, but we didn't care. We wanted them to leave us alone. But on the other hand, we were still too scared to sleep on our own, so we reluctantly accepted that they all came to sleep with us. It took them months to regain our trust again. It was the worst night of my life, no doubts. I've never had nightmares about it, but I remember it like it was yesterday. Now that I'm older, I always like to think of what would have happened if two guys had been there to kill us. We were children, sure, but armed and ready to defend herself if need be. I'm a journalist, so I can't help but think of some headlines. 2 murderers stabbed to death in the mountains by 13 children. Things were a lot different back then, and the Scouts has definitely changed for the better. When I was in my early 20s, I had a friend with a psychotic alcoholic father. She didn't live with him. He lived in a remote little coastal town. Now and again, we would go together to visit him and stay the night. My relationship with him was creepy in itself, but that isn't the subject now. One night, when we were visiting, my friend and her dad had a drunken blow-up and kicked us out of the house. It was about midnight. We had gotten a lift down and didn't have a car. My friend's dad lived about 4 kilometers out of town, a huddle of 2 or 3 shops by way of a dirt road. We started walking down the dirt road to the town where there was a telephone booth. This was in the days before it was commonplace to have a mobile phone. I was going to call my folks, who lived about an hour and a half away, and see if they would come get us. The whole way to town, my friend was drunkenly moaning and crying about her broken relationship with her father, and she didn't let up by the time we got to the phone booth. We sat on the bench next to the phone while I woke my parents up. They agreed to come get us, and I sat down on the bench for the long wait. Shortly after this, a van appeared and parked just behind the bench we were sitting on, maybe 5 meters away.
Oh my
There
god.
were 2 young men in the front seats, and they were looking at us. If that didn't make me nervous enough, the van door slid open, and I saw there were a number of young guys in the back. I don't remember how many, more than 2. The place we were sitting was deserted. There were no houses nearby, just more road. No people, nowhere to run, no one driving by. It was a crappy little nowhere town. I stood up so I could see them better and kept my eyes fixed on the van full of men, acutely aware of our vulnerability. What I saw was that they were looking back at us. They were talking among themselves, quietly at first. Then they started talking more and more loudly. It became evident that they were deliberately talking loud enough for us to hear. They were talking about pulling us into the van and taking us somewhere to have their way with us and kill us. I can't remember the exact words, but that was the gist of it. My whole body was not shaking, but quaking with terror. I couldn't take my eyes off the men. I remember the face of one of them so clearly. I could draw it now. He was just sitting in the door of the van, looking at me with no expression, looking at me with dead eyes, looking at me like I was a thing. At this time, my drunk friend hadn't stopped sobbing to herself. Whether she knew the van was there at all, I couldn't say. I knew I had to tell her about the danger, but I was actually so full of terror I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. That was when the most incredible thing happened. My friend's father, who has never apologized to anyone in his life, appeared, drunk, in his car. It's hard to describe how unlikely it was for him to do this. He could hold a grudge like no one you've ever met, and he was such a stubborn mule. He and my friend had an emotional reunion. The whole time my eyes were fixed on the van. The men had stopped talking and were just watching us. "Let's go," I said. We got in the car and started heading for my friend's dad's house. The van started up and began to follow us. I tried to explain to my friend's dad about the men, but he said, "I'll just slow down and they can pass." They slowed to a crawl behind us, and then they began to shout out of the windows, screaming threats. They followed us all the way down the dirt road, and then all the way down the driveway of my friend's dad's house. They just sat in the van behind us, and we sat in the car waiting to see what would happen. All my friend's dad's neighbors were holiday homes, and nobody was in that night. We knew that if the group of men decided to get out of the van and carry out those threats, we would get no help. After a very long time, the van backed out of the driveway, and they left. My parents came in a panic to the house, and they couldn't find us at the shops. My friend's dad hid in shame, and I went back to my family's house. I've been asked if I went to the police, but I can't remember. I don't think I did. It was a messed up time in my life, but that incident changed me forever. I'm a very fearful person now, and very overprotective of my kids, and I don't want to change because I'd rather be like this than accidentally trust one of the millions of psychos out there. I I used to live in a part of Memphis, Tennessee that was a little shaky. It was right on the edge of what some would call the ghetto, but also there was a nearby area that was pretty secluded and desolate as it lived on the outskirts of the city, kind of near the industrial part near Raleigh for anyone unfamiliar. I was an 8-year-old boy when this happened, and my sister was 5 years older. The two of us went for walks on occasion. This time we went to the back of the housing division and further than we'd gone before. This area was pretty dirty and desolate for such a city. Just train tracks and a nearby industrial facility. Lots of dry tan grass coming through spots in the railroad gravel. Lots of dusty crap people dumped illegally around the tracks. There used to be a pack of stray dogs that frequented my neighborhood, but other than that, no people or cars would ever really be seen out there. Not that far behind my neighborhood anyway. We were just walking along the tracks, talking, throwing rocks, when I saw some strange movement just beyond the tree line of this small wooded area about 40 feet ahead of my 11 o'clock position. I told my sister to look as we walked a bit closer. We made it to about 10 to 15 feet away from the wooded area when we realized the movement was in fact a mine, of all things, in the middle of nowhere seemingly, hidden amongst the trees and thick dead vines that adorn the edge of the wooded area. Painted face, black striped shirt with black pants. He had the exaggerated expressions of a mime too. His eyes got really wide and he seemed to start, I don't know, performing for us. He was kind of doing it in a way to, I guess, attract us, maybe entice us beyond the small wall of thick vines and brush and into the wooded area where he stood, or lurked, to be more precise. I honestly couldn't tell you much about him, as we ran away pretty quickly. I do, however, remember that it was a very hot day outside that day, and his makeup was pretty dingy and gross, as were his clothes. I know this sounds pretty unbelievable, but I assure you it happened. I sometimes wonder who that mime was. I'm sure he wasn't there to kidnap children, but who knows what would have happened if we'd gone to that thicket? And why there? It was just simply insane, I think. His mind was gone, which is far more creepy than any kidnapping stranger I've ever read about. This happened last year. School had just started, and my only child was in kindergarten. She had only been in school a few days. We live in a rural area, and we only have one car. So in the mornings, my daughter, her dad, and I get up to take her dad to work. Then my daughter and I come home and get ready for school. Because we live in a rural, dead-end dirt road, we have to drive about a half mile down the main road, where her bus picks her up. Everything was fine that morning. I got her in the bus and headed home. I had the day off from work. I only work part-time, so days off in the middle of the week was normal for me. Anyway, I was doing some house cleaning and putting away some laundry. I went into my daughter's room and started hanging up some clothes in her closet. I had the TV on in the living room, watching it from her room. Then I hear what sounds like a soft, muffled cough. I freeze. I have no idea what that was. I had no idea what to do. I'm just standing there almost paralyzed. My mind is racing. Maybe the cat is outside her window hacking up a hairball. Was I going crazy? Maybe it was the TV. It must have been the TV, right? Yeah, it's probably nothing. At this point, I am standing in a room, holding a shirt and hanger, not moving a muscle. I really have no idea what to do. I then think I should head next door to have my father-in-law check it out. I say out loud, screw it. I drop the shirt and hanger and take off running to the house next door. Luckily, my in-laws live in the house right next door, only about a football field away. And my father-in-law is on disability, so he is almost always home. He is in his mid-60s and on oxygen tank most of the time, so I don't really know what I thought he could do to help protect me, but I was just really freaked out and didn't want to be alone. And he was a hunter, and hunters have guns. So I am running faster than I have ever ran before across our yard, and I bust into his back door screaming his name. He comes walking out of the kitchen looking annoyed that I just scared the crap out of him. I am on the verge of tears trying to tell him something is going on in my house, but I also am talking so fast he can't figure out what I am saying. So he tried to calm me down, and I tell him I think someone might be in the house. He asks if I'm sure, and I say yes. I'm begging him to come over and just check it out, and he agrees. He grabs his gun, and we get in his truck and drive over to my house. I wait in the truck with the doors locked while he goes inside. I am freaking out, looking all around me. He is in there for what seems like forever. He finally comes out and asks if I left a pack of Newports in her room right near her bed on the floor. Now, I am a smoker, but I smoke Camels. I have never bought Newports in my life. I tell him no, those aren't mine. His eyes get huge and he gets a really panicky look on his face. He tells me to stay in the truck and call the cops. He hands me his phone and I dial 911. The lady says we have to wait for the state troopers because we don't live in town. They seriously take like an hour to get out to us. I have already called my husband at work. He called his brothers to come and pick me up. He doesn't work far from home, so it only took about 20 minutes for them to show up. My father-in-law, my husband, and his brother are now walking all around in the woods that surround the houses. Nothing. There isn't anyone around besides us. After a while, the state trooper shows up and takes a look around, and he finds nothing as well. He takes the pack of cigarettes, I guess as evidence, and takes my statement along with my father-in-law's statement. He tells us there really isn't anything he can do. I can't tell him what the guy or girl looks like because I didn't see him. There's nothing. Just a sound I heard and some smokes on the floor. Nothing is missing from the house. There isn't anyone there now, and it doesn't look like forced entry. Of course, there isn't going to be forced entry. We're in the middle of nowhere. Why would I bother to lock my doors when I leave to go somewhere?
That's your
I feel like
first
such an
mistake.
idiot, but nobody locks the doors around here. I don't even have a key for the door on my key ring. We just keep it on top of the outside fridge
Nope.
as a just in case.
Nope.
After the trooper leaves, my father-in-law gives my husband the gun to hold on to in case someone comes back. My husband and brother-in-law change all the locks and all the doors that day, and now we keep a key on our key rings and keep the doors locked at all times. We didn't take our daughter out of school that day. She was only 5 and we thought it would just stress her out. We did let the school know to be on the lookout for some weird activity, and we had talked with our daughter about stranger danger and what to do if she sees someone in the house she doesn't know. I did have her sleep in our bed for a few weeks, but she seemed like she wanted to go back to her room because she's not a baby anymore. But that's it. Life moved on, and nothing has happened since. We never heard from the trooper or anything like that. We never had another incident like that again either. I have no idea what they were planning on doing. I don't know if they were after me or my daughter, or if they just wanted to rob us. I don't think I'll ever know. I still get paranoid from time to time, and I hate to be alone in the house. My husband got me a dog to keep me company and help protect us. I hope with time the fear will get less and less. Please always lock your doors, no matter how safe you think your neighborhood is. You never know who might just be passing through. This happened to my father and my mother years before I or my older brother were born. But even for not being there, this story sends chills down my back. A few years after my father had graduated from CSU, my mother had graduated from TCU, and they both had jobs at a small company in Fort Worth, Texas. Having met a few company parties and hitting things off a few years later, they finally got married, and my father got a job in Colorado for a small but growing engineer company. So off they go, packing up and moving from Fort Worth, Texas to Colorado. Getting in a car with their few belongings, they start to make their way to Colorado. Now, I'm not sure why they took the road they did, but instead of a larger interstate highway, my father and mother decided to take a smaller, not-so-traveled one on a highway on their final stretch back to my father's hometown to catch Highway 14 to their new home. Having driven all day and it being the middle of the night, my father had the idea of pulling off to the side of the road to sleep for a few hours before waking up and finishing out the journey. There were no rest stops on this highway, so it was either side of the road or nowhere to rest. My mother agreed, but maybe 20 minutes after stopping and trying to get some sleep, my mother didn't feel comfortable and decided instead of sleeping here, she would drive while my father rested, and when he woke up, she would rest a while he took over. And just to reiterate, this is a not-so-traveled highway. There are no lights, and my parents are in the middle of nowhere, and the nearest city or town is miles away. Not a mile or two down the road, my mother notices something on the side of the road, and as she gets closer, notices a single man in the middle of nowhere, with no lights or anything, just walking on the side of the road in the direction of where my parents were just parked. There was no car broken down farther up the road, and there was nothing in miles to justify why this man would be walking on the side of the road. My parents don't bring it up much, but they have wondered what would have happened if they had both fallen asleep in their car that night, with a man walking on a stretch of road that can kill you from thirst. Strangers out there are strange indeed. To give you some context, this occurred roughly 14 years ago when I was 12 years old and living on the east side Australian rainforest. When I say rainforest, our house was on a 40-acre property surrounded by bush. The house itself was owned by a Swiss man named Hans. Occasionally he would come down with his tractor and slash the long grass surrounding our house so we could access slightly more of the property in the summer. It was also extremely handy because if you know anything about Australia, it's that we have tons of beasties that can very easily kill you. We lived about a 40-minute drive from the small town center. This meant that if we needed groceries, medical attention, or to contact our parents, say while we're at school, it would be a 40-minute drive before anything could be done. The house sat on the side of a large mountain roughly 3/4 of the way up, so naturally most of the land we called home was strewn with valleys, nooks, and hideaways. We had trails that we could walk, and they led to a stream and a small waterfall, 5 to 6 meter drop. It was a truly beautiful place, but considerably scary to me and my smaller siblings, one brother and one sister slightly younger than me. We knew our neighbors on both sides of the property, but because the location of our house was pretty remote, our nearest neighbors were roughly a 10-minute drive away. One was a lovely old lady who used to wave to us when we got off the school bus before we made the trek to our house every day. I think our parents asked for her to keep an eye on us. The other was a middle-aged man and his family. He was a real jerk who excavated around the bottom border where our properties met and continuously interrupted the stream and waterfall's clear flowing water supply. Lots of strange and creepy crap when you're living in the middle of nowhere, but one in particular involved a guy I certainly don't want to meet again. Being pretty removed from people, it was extremely rare that we ever got visitors we didn't know were coming. When people we didn't recognize turned up, it was usually because they were lost and needed directions.
I've
One
heard
day,
this
though, a
one too
man in
many
the
times already.
It all began when I was 15. I had just lost a bunch of weight and was receiving a lot of attention from boys for the first time. I came from an abusive home, so to be completely honest, I loved all the positive attention I could get. It was not that long before I had my first real boyfriend, Doug. He was older, and I was pretty happy, for a little while. The relationship turned abusive. He would talk down to me, treat me like crap, hit me, and various other things. After 9 months of this, I finally called it off, which caused a huge fist fight in the morning. I was free of him, and eventually started dating a much more evil person.
Oof.
But this story isn't about him. Doug would contact me, often begging me to hang out with him, and even contacting my then boyfriend. This continued for years. Finally, he seemed to have a mental breakdown near the beginning of the year. Doug began blowing up my Facebook account. Every half hour I would have 50 new messages. Not even kidding. They ranged from him telling me that we were soulmates, he went to therapy about what he did to me, and it was because of me his life was now on track, to calling me a heartless bitch who deserved to die. I blocked his accounts, but he only made more. I told him that this was harassment, and he told me, "You care so much about animals, but you care nothing for people. I'm dying here because of you. I should sue you for neglect. You shouldn't have started something you couldn't finish." I told him I finished it 5 years ago. He then found me on every social media platform and started mass messaging me, including on open YouTube chats, and all I could do was block him. I ignored technology for a while, but I work online, so I ended up going to the police for a restraining order, due to the messages saying things like, "I'm going to find you. If I can't have you, no one can. You're a monster. You're gonna pay for what you're doing to me." and a lot of really personal stuff that I would rather not share. The police say they feared for my safety and were going to arrest him. That is when I was stopped from going home after intense questioning about our 5-year finished relationship. I did not talk to him in that time, and they told me that they spoke to Doug's brother. Doug had quit his job on a whim and told his family he was biking up to my area, about a 4 or 5 hour drive, to find me. I was placed in a shelter in a city, and it was weeks until they caught him, lost, with some love letters addressed to me that apparently ended in some variation of "we needed to die together as soulmates." He posted bail pretty fast, and I know he still stalks me online because I always see his name on things, whether it's signing petitions or drilling my friends about me. I messaged a few friends a video explaining, and kind of mocking, the situation. He now has a video up about me on YouTube titled "My Stalker Story," as was shown to me by my friend. I am happy to say that I have since dated a wonderful gentleman, and am very happy. But I am still terrified of him. I have nightmares of him finding me. My name is Lauren. I'm nearly 21 now. But when I was 18, I finally moved out of my parents' house to go to college. And I was so excited. I'm really close to my family, but I couldn't wait to get out of my small town and finally live in a bigger city. I had a friend there who was a junior at the university at the time. She was studying abroad for the year, and was lucky enough to sublet her room for a low price. The house was old, with peeling paint and dead grass. The only plant on the lot was an ancient oak tree towering over the small home. It wasn't great, but it was a great deal for a freshman. I had 4 roommates, all of them upperclassmen. 3 lived on the second floor, and 1 in the bonus room/attic. My room was on the first floor, facing the back of the property. It was only large enough for a queen bed and a dresser, but I didn't mind, as I was just happy to have a room separate from my sister. The other girls were really nice and laid back. I had no friends there, and they were really welcoming. They invited me to go to their parties and other fun events, introduced me to their friends, and bought me alcohol. They felt like the cool older sisters that I never had. It wasn't really my scene. I'm more of a quiet, avoid people at all costs introvert, but I told myself college was the place to change that. They decided to host a barbecue a few weeks into the semester. As the night progressed, the small party basically turned into a rave. More and more people arrived, most of them already blackout drunk. I had a few drinks, but definitely wasn't wasted. One of my roommates introduced me to her friend Ben, who, like me, was hanging on the outskirts of the crowd. He was cute, tall, lean, with brown eyes and dark hair, and definitely my type. He was on the quieter side, a little nerdy, but that didn't bother me. In fact, I liked that about him. Over the next few weeks, I saw him around campus a lot, at the library, coffee shop, and even in an antique store. He joked that it was a sign that we were meant to be, and laughed. Ben asked me if I wanted to go to a friend's party with him that weekend. He said he hated that scene, but it might be fun if I was there. I agreed. All week, I really looked forward to seeing him. He picked me up early, and we got food before the party. When we got to his friend's house, Ben was the perfect date. He understood my usual dislike for crowds of strange people, and made a special effort to make me feel comfortable. At first, it was a lot of fun. Later that night, one of Ben's extremely drunk friends decided he was okay to drive home, and Ben took off the stopping. It was taking a while, and a short, round-cheeked guy came to chat with me until he returned, noticing how awkward I was by myself. He introduced himself as Simon, a friend of Ben's. He seemed nice, so we talked and we drank. "You're too good for him, you know," the friend said, changing the subject of our light conversation. He eyed me seriously, as if he were sizing me up. I'm sure that's not true. I forced a small laugh, but his expression told me he wasn't joking. I didn't understand. I felt an arm on my shoulder and Ben interrupted. You guys talking about me? He grinned. Yes, I smiled, relaxing into him. Good, Ben said, shooting a pointed look at the other boy. Simon's face reddened, and he scuttled quickly away. What a creep, Ben muttered. What do you mean? I asked, watching the small, thin Simon where he stood in the corner. Yeah, I didn't want to freak you out, but he's been staring at you all night. He hasn't taken his eyes off of you. It was weird, and definitely a little creepy, but I soon forgot about the incident. 20 minutes later, I started to feel sick. I cursed myself for drinking so much beer, which I knew usually made me nauseous. I didn't want Ben to see me throw up, and I made a quick excuse to go to the bathroom. The room was spinning, and I had to hold myself up on the wall. I found the bathroom, and within seconds I'm on the floor. My limbs are heavy, and I can't even pull myself up to sit. I'm paralyzed, face down on the gross linoleum. At this point, I'm freaking out and can't stop crying. I was way too fucked up for only a few beers. I hear knocking and a boy calling my name. I know you're in there, Lauren. It felt far away, like a horrible dream. Let me in. Even with the throbbing bass, I could tell it was Simon. Lauren, let me in. He won't stop yelling and pounding on the door. It's so loud. I thought the door surely was going to split in half from the sheer force of it. Leave me the fuck alone, I wanted to scream, but it came out as a small whimper. I was never really religious, but I prayed that the door would hold against him. A moment later, I heard another shout, and then what sounded like a fight. Lauren, it's Ben. He's gone now. Are you okay? I still couldn't answer. My mind was so fuzzy, and everything was going dark. I can't remember what happened next. Even now, I can't recall all the details. I woke up a few hours later. It was dark, and I had no idea where I was, but it felt like a bed. My head pounded, and I felt extremely hungover. I didn't move, partially from whatever the hell I had been slipped, and partially because I was petrified. A heavy weight was on my waist, and it took a minute for me to register that it was actually someone's arm. My heart was pounding, and I strained to hear anything else. When I finally managed to calm down, I heard a familiar whirring sound. My charging laptop. I gathered all my courage and reached slowly out to the left, hoping to feel the metal yank chain of my lamp. I did, and I lit the room. Ben was fast asleep in the office chair. Kate was passed out in bed beside me. She woke with the light. Kate said she was so glad I was okay. She said Ben had brought me home after fighting off Simon. He had wanted to take me to the hospital, but the roommates had convinced him not to, as I was underage and probably not in any real danger. Ben reluctantly agreed, but insisted to stay to make sure that I was okay. I still felt sick for the rest of the day, and Ben stayed to play nurse. The roommates jokingly called him the hero, my knight in shining armor. Ben smiled, surely accepting of the praise. Late that same night, however, Ben had to leave. He was a pizza delivery man and had to work the late shifts. Soon after he goes, I get a text from an unknown number telling me that they had a great time at the party and they liked the way my legs looked in my skirt. I asked who it was. You know who this is. I quickly blocked the number and suspected Simon. I showed the other girls, and they told me to save the text just in case. Ben started coming over nearly every night, and soon became my first real boyfriend. It was definitely a new experience. I had never forgotten the incident, but after not seeing Simon, or going to any more parties, I relaxed a little. It helped having Ben, my hero, by my side. Everything was going pretty well. Ben agreed to take our relationship slow. After a month and a half of constant contact, however, I felt like I needed a little space. I decided to go home for the weekend, which was about 3 hours from school. Ben was a little upset that I wanted to leave, but said he understood. I didn't have a car, and my parents didn't want to drive 6 hours round trip, so I had to take the train. Ben drove me to the train station and kissed me goodbye. He had to go into work soon, and had to drop me off an hour early. Approximately 30 minutes before the train, my phone starts buzzing. Again, it was an unknown number. "That suitcase is too big for a weekend," the text read. "You're not trying to leave me, are you?" I searched the room hysterically. There, a wooden bench across the lobby, sat Simon. His buzzed blonde head was semi-covered in a hood, and he had no bags or a ticket. Our eyes locked immediately. All I could hear was my heart hammering against my rib cage. My stomach turned and I sat there, frozen. I finally willed myself to move and leapt from my seat, surprising the couple beside me. "Who the fuck do you think you are?" I shouted, suddenly so angry I couldn't control myself. Simon looked from side to side, as if he were waiting for one of the now staring passengers to intervene. As if on cue, a large man in an Amtrak uniform stopped me and warned me that if I didn't calm down, I was going to have to leave. I still tried to push past the employee, but when I finally knocked back his broad shoulders, Simon was gone. I was furious and wanted to follow him. I wasn't usually the fighting type, but I was 5'8", a few inches taller than the creep, and I was fit enough to get a good hit in. The male worker was shouting at me to get my things and just go, but a female employee intervened and attempted to pacify me. I began to cry and gave her a summary of what had happened. She was a very sweet older lady, and she held me as the others in the station continued to watch. She said I reminded her of her old college roommate, who had gone through a similar situation. The woman said her friend had not been so lucky as I was, and I should thank God that Ben was there. I agreed. The train finally arrived, and I boarded. I called Ben and recapped the episode. He sounded nervous, and offered to take off work and pick me up at the stop along the way. I hadn't seen any trace of Simon in the car, so I told him no. Not 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. "You're so sexy when you're scared." "Fuck off," I replied. "I like a girl with spirit. They're more fun to break." This pumped the creep factor off the scale. I called Ben, but he didn't pick up. He was probably on a delivery, so I left a voicemail to call me back. I had the overwhelming sense of fight or flight, neither of which were possible while on a 150-mile-per-hour train. When I finally got off at the station near my house, my family was huddled on the platform, talking to Ben. Confused, I stepped out to greet them. After the barrage of family bear hugs, Ben leaned in. "I called you back 5 times. When you didn't answer, I was worried," he whispered low, so no one could hear. "There was no reception in the country," I explained. "Look," he said, and passed his phone to me. A text from the blocked number. I don't remember the exact words, as it was not on my phone. I don't have the exact words, but it was something about the guard dog leaving me alone all weekend, and he thought Benny would put up more of a fight. Then when I didn't answer his calls, Ben panicked and drove straight here. My parents were excited to meet him, but a little confused, as I had not mentioned him much, and I never told them about the party. Ben, of course, quickly charmed and won over the whole family. Even my dad, an ex-Marine who was the stereotypical protective father of my 16-year-old sister and I, seemed to warm up to him. They asked him to stay the weekend, and he slept in my little brother's room. My mom and sister were both impressed with how attractive he was, and joked that I needed to keep an eye on him. Later that evening, I got another text. "You called the guard dog? You're no fun, babe." Ben held me tight to his chest, and told me he was never going to leave my side. In the next few days, he kept his word. He took the week off of work and even ended up sleeping in my bed with me, rather than the living room couch I used to make him sleep on. While he was with me, the disturbing messages stopped. In class, though, and when I eventually got a job at the coffee shop on campus, I would get some like, "You look good in those jeans," or "I love to watch you work." He knew when I was alone. They started to come so often that they started to become a normal part of my daily routine. Soon after, I had started taking self-defense classes with my campus police. I was becoming more confident that Simon was not a real physical threat anymore, as I had not seen him, and I was extremely careful to watch out for myself. But the less I cared about Simon, the more intense the messages became. I told my cop instructor about the stalker and was advised to change my number. I did, and only gave it to a few trusted friends and family. Despite my best efforts, however, the text still persisted. "You know you can't get away from me. I know where you live. I've been inside." He even described the picture of my family that I had sitting on my desk. I felt so violated, and finally filled an official report to my instructor. I called in every time I received a text, but was told they couldn't do much unless he physically threatened me, which is bullshit if you ask me. I told Ben to go back to work, and that I wasn't so worried anymore. He was delivering pizzas one night. Kate and the other housemates went out to a senior party off campus, and I was enjoying the quiet solitude. It was exam week, and I was up around 3 in the morning studying for the final the next day. I was starting to doze off, so I packed up the books and turned off the music. I turned the lights out and drifted off to sleep. I was awoken by the sound of crunching snow and a scraping noise on the side paneling on the outside of the house. I held my breath and slowly slid my bedside drawer open. I kept the 7-inch marine-grade combat knife, a graduation gift from my father, in there. I used to joke about how ridiculous it was, but I appreciate his paranoia now. But when I felt around for it, it was gone. The fucker had my knife. I was so scared. I was on the edge of hyperventilating. The scratching became increasingly louder, harder, and faster. I saw the silhouette of a man through the curtain, but was too damn petrified to open them, terrified to see what was on the other side. "Go away!" My voice cracked as I screamed. I began to cry, and I hated myself for being such a coward. I tried to sound more confident as I yelled again, "Leave me the fuck alone! I'm calling the fucking cops!" I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The operator said there was a car nearby, and they would be there in 5 minutes. I ran to check the locks on the first floor doors and windows as I stayed on the line with the operator. The noises persisted for another minute that passed like an hour. There was a deafening thud, and I shrieked. I heard sirens nearby and waited for the cops to pull into my driveway before meeting them outside. It was nearly below freezing outside, and I was still in my pajamas, shorts, and t-shirt, but I remember not even feeling the chill. I explained through sobs what had happened, and that Simon had been harassing me for months. The officers pulled me inside and told me to warm up. She said that there was another officer on the way, and told me to lock up behind her as she checked the yard. The other policeman arrived, and it happened to be my self-defense trainer. He helped the woman search the area. I called Ben and left a voicemail. They returned a few minutes later and said that whoever it was had left. They followed the footsteps to the road, but couldn't find any more, as the road had been salted and plowed very recently. The two fell quiet and looked between at each other. "What is it?" I asked. It was obvious they were keeping something from me. They were silent for a moment, before my instructor told me to get dressed. I did, and we walked in silence outside. We avoided ruining the large footprints, then followed to the side. My heart dropped to my stomach, and my knees felt like jello. Under the window of my bedroom was a rushed message etched in the paneling. It said, "Lauren, The woman broke the silence and said she wasn't sure why he would leave his knife behind. Sure enough, there in the snow lay my blade. As a final fuck you, he used my own knife. The cops waited with me until Ben came. They said they would post an officer in front for the night, and they would investigate Simon and review more in the morning. I called my housemates to let them know. A very drunk Kate answered on the fourth dial and said they would just try to stay at the house they were already at. Ben offered to let me stay over, and I grabbed the things I needed for the exam. We went to his apartment. He gave me the key to his place, and he told me he loved me for the first time. I was surprised at the timing, but after what felt like a near-death experience, I just said I loved him too. He convinced me to move in with him, and while I wasn't comfortable living with a boyfriend yet, I agreed until I found another place to live. The rest of the night was uneventful, but I still didn't sleep. I went back to Ben's after my morning exam. He was finishing up an exam himself when I got to the empty apartment. I was making a to-do list of things to move when I got a call on my cell phone. It was my instructor, and I'll never forget the conversation. "Hello," he cut me off mid-greeting. "Are you alone?" Yes," I stuttered. "Why?" He sounded relieved. "Where are you?" "At my boyfriend's." "I need you to get out as quickly as possible," he said. "I'm on the way. Give me 10 minutes. "What's going on?" I pressed, frustrated and concerned. "His footprints. They're the same as the ones last night." In the background, I could hear him flick the sirens on. "Simon's?" I asked hopefully. "Ben's. Do you know where he is?" "Ben's?" I asked, and I almost laughed at how ridiculous it sounded. "He's probably on the way back." "Get out," he stressed. His serious tone told me that it was not some joke after all. I hopped to my feet, flung the door open, and ran
That
straight
looks
into
ugly.
Ben's hard chest. I gasped and dropped the
This
phone from my shaking
Fly,
hands.
if you don't go
The cop's voice
away.
blasted from the speaker. Ben picked it up and held it to his ear. "Who is this?" "She'll have to call you back," he murmured, his dark eyes not breaking from mine. "Babe, what's wrong?" His tall frame blocked the doorway, and he slowly herded me back inside, turning the lock behind him. I was just, going for a walk," I whispered, barely audible. "Without a coat?" he continued, inching closer. "You'd catch a cold." His usually relaxed demeanor was now cold and predatorial. "Can I have my phone back?" He looked at the device in his hand, holding it high above his head as I tried to snatch it. "Please, Ben." Tears welled in my eyes and my heart pounded. "You have to get it from me." He just smiled and chuckled. I jumped, but missed. He wrapped his arms around my shoulders, pressing my body to his. "I love you so much, Lauren. Do you know that?" I shuddered and nodded slowly. "And you love me too?" I nodded again, unable to speak without bursting into tears. "Say it," he growled, yanking my hair back, forcing me to face him. "I love you," I cried. "That's why you'll never leave me, right? Because I protect you. I'm the only one who can." He bent down, pressing his lips hard against mine. Adrenaline really is an amazing part of the human body. I know the self-defense classes really help, and anyone who has the opportunity to take them should. But when the situation arises when you need to make a split-second decision to save your life, your mind goes blank. I bit his lower lip, with enough force that my teeth sunk into it. Blood gushed down his chin and into my mouth as he shrieked. I took his moment of shock to knee him as hard as I could in the balls. He groaned as the air escaped his lungs. I ran past him, nearly to the door when he yanked my left arm back, wrenching it from its socket. I screamed, landing on my ass. "I did it for us," he roared, blood gurgling in his mouth. He spit and kicked me in the ribs. A sickening crack sent pain shooting up my side. "You're psychotic!" Sirens wailed in the distance. and relief washed over me. In minutes, 5 cops rushed the door, swarming him and pinning him to the floor. I remember his red, angry face looking at me as his split lips squished against the ground. I thought to the night of the party, which I felt helpless and Ben was the only one who would help. Now he was the helpless one, cuffed with an officer straddling his back. "I love you. I didn't do anything wrong. Lauren, tell them," he shouted, between the cops and me. "I fucking love you. What are you doing? Tell them." My instructor helped prop his head up, afraid to move me until the ambulance came, just in case I had any serious injuries. It turns out that the cops had brought Simon in earlier for questioning. He had a solid alibi, and explained that he had no idea what was going on. He said that he knew Ben was shady since his freshman year of college, when he suspected Ben of drugging and sexually abusing a friend of his. That night of the party, he saw me in bad shape, and rushed to the bathroom to help me. Ben came and brutally beat him, knocking him out. He tried to warn me before. After the big scene at the party, Ben had no choice but to bring me home with my housemates. When they constantly praised him for being my hero, he decided it was the only way I would want to keep going out with him, if he was the only security I had. When the police went to talk to his employers, they said that he quit about a week before the incident at the train station. So he stalked me for months, saying he was at work when he was really outside my window, and breaking into my room when he was supposed to be at work. They found a second cell phone in his glove box with all the texts. Every time he thought I was drawing away from him, he would terrorize me to bring him back closer. He wanted me all to himself, and managed to pull me away from my friends and family, saying that they would only worry if I told them, and that they couldn't do anything anyway. I had become so isolated and dependent on him. The police went back to my house after Simon's interrogation, and noticed the footprints. Ben was smart enough to change shoes, but was still the same size, which was a good 4 sizes bigger than Simon's. Not only that, but the side of my house was on a hill, and Simon's head would only come up to about an inch or two above the sill, unlike 6'3" Ben. Ben ended up being charged with aggressive assault, though the attempted rape charges were dropped, as there was no proof of it months later. He's now on his 3rd of a 6-year sentence. Simon moved schools, choosing to finish his senior year at a community college instead. I ended up becoming pretty close with my cop instructor, who will hopefully be my partner in the next year, if I pass my police exam in the fall. A little background first. I was 18 and I had been working at McDonald's for about a year, and had saved up enough money to move into my own place. I found a little apartment down the street from my parents' house. It was kinda creepy and old, but cheap, so I took it. I, being the second oldest of 5 kids, loved my freedom, and would often chill in my apartment in just a t-shirt or naked if I felt like it, especially in the summer, 'cause wow, that old apartment got hot. To give you an idea of the setup of my apartment, when you first walk in, the door opens to a huge living room to the left, the kitchen to the right, the bathroom, and further down to the left is my room. I had just gotten off a really long shift, and had been thinking about the fat joint waiting for me the entire time. I walked home this day because I couldn't get a hold of my mother, and I didn't want to wait at work or in the heat for her. I made it home, and it had to be like 1,000,000 degrees that day. I was extremely sweaty by the time
I
I
hate
got home.
this face.
I turned the key and walked in, put my things on the sofa like I always did, turned around, took off my shoes, and locked the door. I know I did for a fact. I'm a tiny person, like 4'11" and 115 pounds, if that. My parents instilled a healthy fear into me and my siblings. So yes, I always made sure my doors and windows were locked, even during the day. I stripped down to my most vulnerable state, sparked my joint, and was wandering around my apartment. I flipped on the radio, and when I turned around, my door was wide open, and about 3 feet away from me stood an old woman. She was wearing a pink and blue thick old school ugly Christmas sweater and matching sweatpants and snow boots. I ducked my baked naked ass down behind the sofa and tried to pinch my joint out, burning the tips of my fingers. I don't know why she didn't see me, but she was standing in my doorway mumbling to herself. She needs this. She needs this. In a snap creaky kind of whisper, over and over. I stared at her for a while, kind of in shock. She has slimy gray hair, slicked back and curly at the ends. Her eyes were the creepiest part. She was fumbling with a Christmas tree holder thing. I figured she was a nutcase and decided to yell at her to maybe scare her away. Hey, get the fuck out of here. I have a gun. It takes her a second to see where I am, and she legit comes towards me, saying, You need this. You need this. In a snap, dry, cracking voice. I run over the sofa and towards the door, and with all my force push it closed and lock it, and pull the sofa in front of it and stand it up and look through the peephole. She's just fucking standing there, looking at the door all weird. She got super close to the door and screams, I can hear you breathing. I dive off the sofa and grab my phone and jump back to watch her through the peephole. She's still there. I can kind of see her shoulders, so I said I'm calling the police and for her to get the fuck out of there. She just starts laughing. I wasn't about to call the police though. I had a zip of bud just sitting on the table, and it stunk so bad. So I called my brother. He's a huge dude, and I knew he'd be close by to help. I said as loud as I could, Please come help me, someone's trying to break into my apartment. Luckily my brother was driving to my parents' house, and was already on my street, and I heard him say, I'm here, and he hung up. I hear my brother yell, What are you doing? And saw the lady run towards the exit. I grabbed my work clothes and put them on in a hurry, pulled the sofa out of the way and opened the door. My brother chased her off. I could tell he was trying to intimidate her, not hurt her, just scare her off. I looked at my door and I noticed she was carving words into my door, like Merry Christmas. It's fucking July. I, still to this day, have no idea how she got my door open. My brother thought the entire experience was the funniest thing ever. Like legit tears from laughing while I'm standing there in panic mode, and he just can't stop laughing. I got a roommate super quick after that, and got a chain lock for my door. I've never seen her again, and I even asked my landlord if he knew her, or if she lived in the building. He said he didn't have any older tenants, and maybe she was someone's mom or something. He thought the story was pretty funny too. I'm going to start this out saying I'm an 18-year-old female, but this all started when I began school at 4. The school I went to was a junior kindergarten to grade 8. I remember one day after school, it had to be almost summer, when my mother received a call on our landline. She usually doesn't accept random numbers, so she just declined it. The next day, I went to school, and some random teacher who I think taught one of the higher grades came up to me during recess and asked me something along the lines of, Did you get my call, honey? It wasn't weird at the time. I just thought he would have called my mom about school or something. When I got home and told her about it, she awkwardly called the school, which I found was different than the number who called, and they said they didn't know of a call made. So she told them about the teacher, and they didn't take it seriously, I assume, because the next day, during recess, he came over and talked to me. I forget about what, though, and still, I didn't think it was weird. But then he took it too far. One time I was having a sleepover with my friend, we'll call her Janice, and we were having popsicles out near the pool. We have a fence and a gate around our backyard, so my mom would let us just hang out, but she had to be there when we swam. We were chatting and sucking on our popsicles when I hear the gate rattle and whistling. I instantly call my mom thinking it's for her, and she comes out, but not before I hear someone running away. Janice and I tell my mom what happened, and when my dad came home she asked if anyone was supposed to be there. I'm guessing he said no, because after that she never let us go out there without her. Nothing else happened for a while, except a few odd compliments like, "Ah, that's quite a short dress there, honey," or something weird like that. Then mid-year senior kindergarten, He brought his class into ours because they were reading to us, and we were going to watch a movie. I got paired with someone. We read, and then we watched The Nightmare Before Christmas, even though Christmas had passed. This whole time his hands were tickling my back, and I thought it was so weird. I told my mom when I got home, and she seemed to have enough, because she called the school and told me to go to my room. Fast forward to summer, and I'm at Dairy Queen or something, and my mom is ordering right beside me. I'm sitting with Janice at the booth, and the door jingles, signaling someone's coming in. Guess who it is? Creepy teacher man. Me and Janice visibly tense up, and my mom notices the guy, who she's seen before because of the annual school carnival and me pointing him out. She escorts us out to a lake, since 1, she doesn't want us near that freak, and 2, the lakes are nice where I live, and she probably thought that scenery and Sundays would make us happy. Now the weird stuff happens. School starts up again, and frankly, I'm a bit nervous about seeing Creep McGee, and if he'll confront me about the Dairy Queen incident. Luckily he doesn't, I think. It was so long ago. But during nighttime was when things started to get bad. I was in my room and waiting for my mom to fetch a snack for me. My room is on the bottom floor, and there's a huge window just beside the window on the backyard side. Suddenly, I hear footsteps, and I peer outside the window, and there he is, with the most terrifying smile ever. He was crawling on all fucking fours to my window, and tapped it oddly, like he was playing a song or something. I screamed for my mom, but he didn't move. She came in, and started yelling for him to leave. My dad came in, and she told him to call the cops. Long story short, he was fired from his job, and we got a restraining order. But oh, it doesn't end there. It was a few years, 3 I think. I was 8. We'd moved to a different city 2 hours away from my old one, and I went to a different school. After school, I had a babysitter, Rebecca, and she was super nice. I told her about the perv teacher, and she told me a story about how something similar happened to her. Well, she picked me up from school one day, and we were walking to her car. She parks about a mile down the road so we can walk and chat. But about half a mile in, she starts rushing me, and we're slightly jogging. I turned my head for 1 second to see a man with a long beard, but I knew it was him, and he was violating his restraining order. He was also walking quite fast. We made it to her car safely, and she was just about to hit the gas pedal before, in the same melody, he tapped my window in. She had the most horrified look on her face, but I knew we were safe in her car. Can you please give me a ride to my mother's house? I
No.
baked some cookies for her,
No.
he asked through the window. So fucking creepily. No, Rebecca responded, not even bothering to give an excuse. She was about to floor it, probably, before he frowned, kicked the car, and left. Obviously, Rebecca told my parents, and they called the police. I don't know what happened next, since I was 8, but I'm sure they found him. What is creepy to me now is that he was in the same city, 2 hours away. Why? Every night my mom would lock our doors, just in case he decided to break in, or be creepy. I closed my blinds every night, but now my room was on the 3rd floor, a loft, so I had nothing to worry about. Now I'm 10, and I still sometimes think about it, but I'm fine going to school with Rebecca, and she picks me up still. She was actually pregnant at the time, and was going to name it after my middle name, Poppy.
Your middle
was
name's
summer.
Poppy?
I had friends
Aw.
over, and Rebecca
That's
was watching us
depressing.
as my parents were out on date night. It was around 8 p.m., so not quite dark yet. There was a knock on the door. Rebecca had ordered pizza, so we thought it was just the pizza guy. But when she opened it, it was the bearded creep. She tried slamming the door, but he put his foot in the door so she couldn't close it. I dove for my phone and called 911, but he persisted. Eventually, he pushed his way in, and me, Rebecca, and my friends beelined it for the basement. The police were on their way, and Rebecca was yelling at him, but he kept kicking or hitting the door. I called my parents too, sobbing, and they told me they'd be home as soon as possible. The police came, and my parents did too. This time they pressed charges, and they had to go to court. He did pay a fine of about $4,000 or something, and had to go to jail for around 2 years. By far the scariest encounter with him was when I was 15. I was at my boyfriend's house, and he was going to walk me home. We just left his house at around 10 p.m., and we were 15 minutes into our walk before we hear, "Hey, get the hell off her, you fucking rapist! What are you gonna do, kidnap her? Murder her?" My heart dropped. A drunk man stumbled out of the bushes and lunged from 5 feet away from us, missing by a long shot. We started running home, and he was chasing us. He wasn't too fast, though. He was grunting and coughing, and we made it home before it was too late. My father had enough of this, and went outside to confront him. He was still there, of course, yelling about how my boyfriend's a rapist and a murderer. I'm still with him today. I'm not sure what happened after that, but I haven't seen Mr. Creep for over 3 years, and I hope we won't meet again.
I gotta fix her hair somehow.
I lived in Menifee, California for about 3 years. During that time, I went to the local high school, and let me just say, a lot of crazy stuff went down while I attended. One time, a library employee showed up at school very early in the morning and shot herself in her car. The body was discovered during second period. What creeps me out most of all was that I passed by her car while walking to school that morning, and I didn't even notice. Another time, an undercover cop posing as a student was able to identify kids that were selling narcotics, and a huge drug bust ensued shortly after. Strangely enough, on that same day that happened, while I was walking to school, some guy I knew asked if I wanted to buy pot off of him, which I wisely declined. Later on, I saw that same guy get arrested and escorted out of the classroom. The event itself closely mirrored the film 21 Jump Street. Pretty awesome. However, the one event that was probably the biggest and shook the entire community was the disappearance and death of a local boy named Terry Dwayne Smith Jr. The tragedy happened during the summer after the 2013 school year. I didn't know who the boy was, but I did know his older brother Skylar. I knew Skylar from school. He was in my first period English class at the time. I didn't talk to him much, even though he sat near me, but on the times that I did say a word to him, he was friendly. He came off as a little odd, but I personally didn't think he was really that strange. He had his own group of friends that were all easy to get along with. Something of note that happened earlier on in that school year was a confrontation he got in with another student. I remember hearing about how one guy said something offensive to Skylar, which greatly angered him and erupted into a fight. The kid's front tooth got knocked out. And at the time it seemed funny to everyone else, but it was an indicator of how far he'd be willing to go when it came to getting agitated. On to the main story. After school ended that year, I spent most of the summer just hanging out with my trio of friends. One day I was in my room doing nothing of interest, so I decided to go on Facebook. While on there, Tyler posted something that appeared on my newsfeed. He said his little brother had gone missing, and was urging his friends to be on the lookout for his whereabouts. I found it pretty unfortunate, but thought the kid would probably be found the same day. Either the same day or the next, I forget which, I happened to be watching the news, and the #1 topic was the disappearance of a boy named Terry. A picture of him was then put up. On closer examination, I noticed he was the same boy that Skylar had posted about earlier. Apparently, the situation had gotten dire, and the brother's mother, Shauna, had called for a group effort to go and search for the boy. As the days went on, more and more people went out in search of young Terry. I believe Skylar made a few more posts about it, but I could be wrong. Eventually, he was made a suspect and was taken into custody by the police because he was the last person to see Terry alive before he went missing. I remember hearing about how a lot of his friends were in denial and disbelief. To them, he could never do such a thing. Since I personally didn't know Skylar that well, I couldn't really pass judgment at the time. While in custody, Skylar changed his story several times about his last encounter with his brother. His main one being that they were home alone, and he decided to leave and go hang out with his friends, and that supposedly Terry followed for a while, until Skylar told him he couldn't tag along, and ordered him to return home. This set the theory that Terry was probably abducted by someone that night. Finally, after several days of searching, Terry's body was eventually discovered behind the family home under a tree in a shallow grave. The general consensus at the time was that Tyler did kill him for unknown reasons and tried to bury him. Some even thought that the mother was in on it, because she was still in defense of Skylar, who was then charged with the crime. Shauna acted pretty strangely, saying that Terry had autism, and that supposedly at first she didn't let the cops investigate her property. After the corpse was discovered, the huge search party was promptly called off, and a candlelight vigil was held for Terry. In the aftermath, a lot of drama ensued. Terry's father came into town from the other side of the country and claimed that his ex-wife had lied about their son having autism and demanded to take his body back with him to be buried in his local area. He even sued Shauna for a large amount of money. I think it was for child negligence or for emotional distress. The two even appeared and debated on the Dr. Phil show, but nothing came out of that besides everything everybody knew. Since at the time Skylar was a minor, he wasn't charged as an adult. He was found guilty of manslaughter, but was offered a plea deal, the details of which have not been released to the public. Apparently what actually happened was that the brothers were roughhousing when Terry accidentally got killed. Their mother later suggested something like the boy hitting his head on the corner of a table or something. In a panic, Skylar tried to bury him in the backyard. What was strange was that knowing what had happened, Skylar still went to Facebook and asked for help in searching for his brother, instead of just confessing. Skylar was sentenced to 12 years, and will stay in juvenile detention until he's 23. Overall, this was pretty tragic, and it's crazy how one day I was talking to someone in class, and the next he's on the news for the murder of his own brother. This story isn't mine, it's my father's. He told me this when I was around 14 years old. When my dad was young, he grew up in a sketchy area of town. A lot of druggies, but mostly elderly on welfare. This story takes place in the 70s. At an early age, my father wandered the disheveled country town often, without supervision, which was a common occurrence back then. When my dad was around 9, he was riding his bike along the country roads and came up on a local pond which was surrounded by dense forests. My dad, being the little adventurer that he was, got off his bike and made his way towards the swamp. He stopped dead in his tracks when he noticed a short, elderly man sitting along the bank of the water. The man had a net in the water and seemed to be spending his time fishing on the warm summer day. My dad was a fearless boy due to being raised with 5 siblings, so he knew how to look out for himself. However, he tended to be a bit of a prick, which landed him in bad situations. So he dropped his bike and jumped into the murky water, fully clothed. This caused ripples to be sent throughout the small pond, which ended up splashing the old man in the process. My father thought the elderly man wouldn't care and would laugh it off due to the intense heat. However, when my father turned around to meet the man's gaze, he was shocked to see a stone expression with bulging gray eyes staring intensely at him. Since my father jumped off a small ledge, a little ways from the road, he had to swim towards the shore, which would make him have to pass this man. He awkwardly made his way towards the shore, trying to avoid the man's gaze. When he reached the shore, he was dumbfounded when the man grasped his wrinkled hands around his shoulders. My dad shuddered as he turned towards the old man. The man's expression was haunting. His gray eyes were dull and seemed dead, and his lips curved into a chilling grin. He grabbed my father and started dragging him into the water. My father struggled, but was no match for the man's strength. The man stopped pulling when they were both waist deep in the water. Before he knew it, the man pushed him under the murky water. He gasped but was met with water filling into his lungs. He started grabbing at the man and trying his best to resist. He felt like he was under for hours, but it was only minutes. The man suddenly let go. My father burst through the water and started gasping for air. The old man simply walked back to the shore, grabbed his supplies, and walked towards the road, leaving my father standing there in the middle of a pond gasping for air. My father never told his family about his experience because he was afraid that he was in the wrong. He is now 47 and still dwells on this experience from time to time. What my father did was rude at best, but it didn't warrant the reaction that it did. Even though the man is probably dead by now, it still brings chills down my spine that my father almost died by his hands. I'm a 19-year-old male from Norway. It was a summer night last year, and I was home alone for the weekend. My sister was in Rome with her boyfriend, and my parents were in Oslo working. I had a very bad hangover from the night before, so I decided to go to bed early. I took a shower, brushed my teeth, and turned off all the lights in the house. I didn't lock the front door because I never felt like it was necessary. The
Until
crime rate in
today.
this small town is extremely low, and nothing usually happens around here. I went to my room, opened my windows for some fresh air, and jumped right into bed. Moments after I fell asleep, I suddenly woke to hearing a few loud and terrifying screams. It sounded like a man in pain or something. The screams came from the house next to mine. I don't know who owns the house, but I knew that the basement apartment was being rented out. I immediately ran to check if the person was okay. The scream was so horrible, and I knew something was wrong. The door was closed, but all the windows were open. I did not hesitate to press the doorbell. I stood there for maybe 40 seconds, but no one opened. At this moment I was very worried, and I was just about to call the police when the door opened. It was a weird-looking guy, who appeared to be in his mid-30s. The first thing I said was, "Are you okay? I heard loud screams coming from your house." He answered pretty fast and said, "Oh, sorry about that. I had a rough night, and I just got a phone call which upset me. Nothing to worry about, but thanks for caring." I was very relieved and told him goodbye. Right before I started walking back, he asked me if I wanted to come in for a beer. I was so tired and I had to go to work in the morning, so I told him we could do it another time. I went to bed again, and a long story short, I woke up the morning after, went to the kitchen and made myself some bacon and eggs for breakfast. After my breakfast, I got ready for work. Just as I went outside to my car, I saw 5 police cars at the neighbor's house. It was very confusing, because I was just there last night, and I just had to know what was going on. I approached a police officer and asked him what had happened. The police officer said, "There's been a homicide. The homeowner was found decapitated in the kitchen." I was in shock, and before I could answer, he showed me a picture of the man I had spoken to last night. The officer asked me if I had ever seen that man around here. I replied, "Yes, I spoke to him last night. I heard screams and checked on him. He was upset about something." The police officer got big-eyed and told me, "Sir, he's not the homeowner. It's the guy we're looking for. He was the one who did this." It felt like my heart was gonna explode. I started sweating and hyperventilating. The police asked me some questions about the night before, and then I rushed to work. On my way to work, I started thinking about what would have happened if I would have gone inside that house. I'm just so grateful nothing happened to me. Luckily, the guy was found, and he got life in prison. I'd like to preface this with some quick info about my dad and where we live. My dad is a big, scary-looking dude in his late 50s. He has a well-trimmed beard, a shaved bald head, and he is big. That being said, he's a big softie. One of the friendliest people I know. We live in a small fishing town in Maine. A lot of the locals, if not normal, are either rich old people, sailors and or fishermen, or bored students on drugs. It's a very peaceful town where crime barely happens, and everybody, even the kids on drugs, is generally friendly, if not a bit standoffish. About half a year ago, I realized how quick to anger my dad is when it comes to driving. While he was driving down this long, twisty, dangerous road that connects the islands together, a tourist with an expensive-looking car was tailgating us like he wanted us to speed up, despite the fact that we were already going a little over the speed limit. My dad, not taking too kindly to this, stopped his car at the first chance he got, telling my mom he was going to have a chat with this asshole. My mom quickly convinced him that it wasn't worth it, so my dad settled for flipping off the dick and letting him pass. The second time something like this happened, we were at Walmart. It was just my dad and me at the time. Driving around the parking lot, we were cut off by a younger driver. The man, somewhere in his 20s, decided to flip us off, even though we were in the right-of-way. My dad, tired from a long day, and not so pleased that he and his child were being so rudely insulted, started tailing this guy. It didn't hit me until afterwards how scared this guy must have been. We followed him around for a good few minutes, and he was making turn after turn trying to lose us. My dad eventually gave up the chase, so we could get our Walmart shopping over with. I know for a fact that my dad means no harm whatsoever. He really does just like to talk to them. They don't know that, though. It worries me to think that more likely than not, this wasn't the first few times something like this has happened. I'm afraid that my dad one day would end up in a video like this one, or worse, on the news as yet another victim of road rage. This happened about 6 months ago. I was 22 at the time, and my daughter was only 4. I lived in a 2-story house with just me, my daughter, and my husband. I was taking at-home classes to be an iPhone specialist, starting at 5 p.m. and ending at 10 p.m. Monday through Friday. My husband had just left for his 2 weeks of training he does every year for the military, so it's just me and my daughter and our pit bull mix, Mavis. I had just finished my class for the week and had the weekend free, so I decided to go to my mother's house until Sunday. So I packed up all my stuff and my daughter's stuff, and we went for the weekend. We returned home Sunday to find that someone had broken into our home. There were muddy footprints everywhere and windows open, but nothing was missing. That struck me as odd, because I have iPads, laptops, etc. just laying about in my room, so I made sure all the windows and doors were locked. Nothing happened that night, but the next day my mother came over to pick up my daughter, so I could do my classes without worrying what she was into. They left, and I went to watch my class upstairs. I put my headphones on so I could hear my teacher instruct the class, but swore I kept hearing stuff downstairs. I even texted my mom and told her that I was hearing stuff downstairs, and it was creeping me out. But she assured me it was probably just Mavis because everything was locked up tight, and no one could get in. I agreed, thinking I was probably just freaking myself out. I continued listening to my instructor teach, and I swear I heard footsteps on the stairs, so I hurry up and take my headset off and listen. I don't hear anything. I walked down the stairs and didn't see anything either, so I went back to class. At 10 p.m. my class was over, and my mom decided to just keep my daughter for the night. I was doing homework with Mavis upstairs with me, and all of a sudden she started barking and growling and ran downstairs. Now, Mavis usually barks and growls at the slightest noise outside, so I didn't think much of it, but I decided to check it out anyway, because of what happened while I was at my mother's.
Oh.
Again, nothing was out of the
She
ordinary.
got bits.
I went back
That scared the
upstairs.
shit out of me.
I was finally done with homework, and it was about midnight. So I
Thank
went
you,
downstairs and called my mom like I do every night.
Spamzilla. Thank you so much
We
for the
were
one
talking,
bit.
and I decided to open my daughter's door and peek my head in.
That actually
I don't know
scared
why I
me.
did this. My daughter was at my mom's for the night. But habit, I guess.
I don't even have my.
I should have mentioned
It's
earlier
such a
that
laid
when
back
you look
stream.
into
I
my
don't even
daughter's
have
room,
my
her bed is on the far
stream
wall,
labels
a good ways
open.
away from the door, so you can
Hold
clearly
on.
see under the bed. So I opened the door, and to my horror, a man was under the bed. I just froze and
Shit,
didn't
man
move.
under the bed, dude.
Just stood there in shock. After what felt like minutes, I slowly shut the door and whispered into the phone to my mom that there was a man in my house under
Yeah,
my
thank you,
daughter's bed.
God Spamzilla, for the
My
one
mom was
bit. Thank
terrified
you.
and was already in the car on her way. She already had my brother call the police, and she screamed at me to get outside. So I ran outside with Mavis and waited for the police to arrive. About 3 minutes later, they come and search my house and found no one. But they discovered my bathroom window was open, and they happened to shine their light into the living room window, and I could clearly see 2 huge handprints where they slid the window down. The cops waited for my mom and brother to get there, and while we were waiting, they told me about this man that usually stays 2 houses down from mine with his parents. Both of his parents had a pretty bad drug habit, and this guy has been known to put women in the hospital and try to kill them. What scares me even more is since we have bought this house, my daughter has been terrified and always told my mom she wanted to stay with her because it wasn't safe at mommy's house. I didn't think too much of it because I thought maybe it was just a new place. And you know how kids are with new places.
It's
After
gonna
this
be a
whole thing
pain in the
happened,
ass drawing
I
all
stayed with
those
my mom until
flowers.
my husband came home. We decided to ask our daughter about the house, and what she told me absolutely terrified me. She said that at night while her dad and I slept, monsters come to her window and try to get in, and she says it's a boy monster and a girl. The next day we installed alarms on all the windows and security lights. I can't stop questioning why. Why was this man under my daughter's bed? Was he waiting for me to go to sleep? Was he waiting for my mom to bring my daughter back home and I put her to bed? I get sick to my stomach thinking what could have happened. In March of 2003, when I was 17, my younger brother and I took a weekend camping trip up to the Los Padres National Forest. We had gone there many times with our families for day camping, swimming, and just lounging around. This time, though, we went alone for a 2-night camping trip at our favorite spot that locals simply called the Gorge. We will never forget this weekend, for all the wrong reasons. We got there Saturday morning at around 9 a.m. and hiked the 5 miles out to the Gorge. The Gorge is a large swimming hole with a huge 60-foot rock cliff boulder that visitors love to jump off into the deep waters below. The jumping rock cliff is very steep, and one must jump in a specific location below to ensure that they did not hit rocks protruding from the
I heard
wall's
this one
face.
already.
The Gorge has many primitive camping areas, and is overall a beautiful yet isolated place. The first day was very fun, and after a long day of swimming, catching crawdads, jumping from the rocks, and just relaxing.
What do you listen to? Listen to Creepypasta. I'll link it. Sorry. Creepypasta, that's what we're listening to.
This happened in my junior year of high school. One evening, my mother and stepfather had gone out to some event. Maybe it was an extended dinner or a concert. I can't remember. I had stayed home to work on a paper that was due the next day and spent the whole night working at the desk in my room. To give you a picture of the room, my desk faces a wall and sits next to a small window that's on the same wall. And from where I sit, my back faces my doorway. While I was working, I was wearing these great headphones that I had gotten for my birthday, the kind that are noise canceling. My parents left the house around 6 p.m., and the whole time they were gone, I sat at my desk, blasting music through my headphones and writing my essay. Occasionally, I would take breaks and watch the rain and lightning outside my window. I never left my desk. My parents returned around 11 p.m., and at some point late in the evening, I had removed my headphones. So when my parents came home, which was coincidentally Just a few minutes after I had taken off the headphones, I clearly heard the garage door open, and my parents opened the door to the house. Seconds after I hear them enter, I hear my mother shout my name. "Adrian!" she screams. "What on earth happened in here?" Confused, I get out of my chair and start walking through the house to them. There's only a small hallway that separates my room from the living room. Due to my rush to figure out why my mother was yelling, I paid little attention to the hall and the house. After a few moments, I get to my parents. My mom looks really upset. "Was this you? Did you have friends over?" I look down. The carpet is ruined. It's covered in muddy footprints. I frantically explained to her that I have no idea how those got there, that I had spent the whole night at my desk working on my paper. I watch as her face goes from anger to confusion to fear. We realize that someone else must have entered the house. Quickly, we scan the footprints, trying to make sense of the situation. It only takes us a few moments to figure out where they start. Our back door,
This is a good place
which was
to end,
usually
actually.
left, unlocked.
I'm gonna have to
Then we noticed
make a whole
something
bunch of
else. The
spam these
footprints started at the back
crosses.
door, but there
Yeah,
were no
I
footprints
got a lot of work
exiting
done,
the back door.
so yeah, I
We
think
hear something pounding through our
I'm
house.
going to make one more
We hear
layer.
the front
Let's
door
see
get torn open
how
and
it
then
used to look.
slammed shut. We all run into the garage and lock the
That's how it
door.
used to look.
My mom starts shouting at the police through
Oh,
the
that's what
phone.
it looks like.
"Please come quickly. Someone has broken into our house."
A lot
After
better.
listening for hours,
Yeah.
police arrived. An officer
This is
stayed
something I
with us in
did
the garage
2
as his
years
partner
ago,
goes through the
so
house
I'm
room
going
by
to make a
room.
Lionel cut out of it.
His
So
partner tells us that it's safe to go
there'll
back
be a
in,
stream of that too.
that there's no one in the
So
house.
I'm gonna go
Then
now. I'll
she
see you
asks
guys
us a
later.
question. She asks
Thanks for the
us,
bits, by the way.
"Whose room is down the hall?" To the
Stay
left.
spooked.
My parents look at me, and I tell